Rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening. Tonight is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Board of Estimate Taxation for January 2009. I guess it's appropriate to wish everybody a Happy New Year, although that seems like ages ago. I jokingly said to some of my fellow colleagues that I'll hopefully make up for the length of last month's meeting with the brevity of this month's meeting, and maybe everybody else can join in with me in that endeavor. To that end, because the Budget Committee was unable to meet a week ago and met last night, our agenda had to be posted 24 hours in advance, and therefore all applications on the formal agenda were noted as non-routine applications. However, at this time, I would entertain a motion to combine several items and treat them as routine.
So moved.
I so move.
Which items would be combined as routine items?
I would move items ED5, ED6, ED7, LU1, and PD1.
Moved by
5
Ms.
items.
Tarkington, second by Mr. Crumick. Any opposition to taking those items up and treating them as routine items?
Yes. I do.
Is there one in particular?
I want to deal with the eels and the DUI enforcement program. Oh, okay.
Yes, it was, PD1. This is already becoming more complicated than I had hoped, but
I'll move just the first 3
the
items.
first 3 items, ED 5, 6, and 7. Is that
Second.
second by Mr. Crumick? All those in favor of combining those items and treating them as routine?
Aye.
Therefore, Madam Clerk, if you could start off the non-routine applications.
Okay. Good evening. I'd like to move the following items. ED5 for the Board of Education, approval to use $5,000. ED6 for the Board of Education, approval to use $107 and $102. ED7 for the Board of Education, approval to use $5,000. LU1, Land Use Administration /
That we said we separated.
Sorry
that.
about that.
It's been moved by Ms. Tarkington, ED5, ED6, and ED7. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Mason. Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? 11-0-0. Ms. Barton is, I believe, out of the country. The next item on our agenda, LU1. For that, what is essentially a non-routine application, I call upon Mr. Mason as Budget Chair.
Good evening, good evening. LU1 comes from the Land Use Administration Conservation. It's approval to accept and use $2,000 for an eel survey on the Barm River. And our committee took that up last night and with a brief discussion approved it 4-0. And I so move, I'm sorry.
Moved by Mr. Mason, second by Mr. Simon. Discussion, Mr. Kelly.
I just got upset as I read this. This was a grant for $2,000, and I see the application is about 11 pages. I don't know how much time somebody in the Conservation Department spent on preparing this particular document for a $2,000 grant, and we're going to now spend $1,500 of our money, apparently on a lead investigator, to look at eels traveling up the Byram River. And I think we need to really focus on what that department is doing, and I don't know that this is a priority. So I'll vote against it, but I want to keep my comments short.
Other discussion?
We're not, even though it says $1,500 on there, that is time that the temp normally would be doing things. so it's treated as in kind, and we get reimbursed 2,000. Because the temp is regular hours is going to be doing this work.
I don't want to spend a lot of, I understand, we can probably talk about it offline. I don't want to spend any time on this. I just wanted to note my objection. I think somebody probably spent a lot of time preparing for this $2,000 grant to study eels, and I don't know that that's the best time spent by somebody in the department. That's the real issue with me.
Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
One.
Abstention? 10-1-0. Mr. Mason for PD1.
PD1, Police Department, approval to use $34,200, and I so move it.
Moved by Mr. Mason, second by Mr. Simon. Mr. Mason for discussion.
The Budget Committee met on this last night. We had Sergeant Berry with us from the Police Department. This is a grant of $34,200, which works. We get the amount of money, and we use it within the state's fiscal year. We have to spend 25% of what they give, so it's an $11,000 expense on the town side. The remaining $34,200 comes from the state reimbursement. It's fairly routine. The only difference is I believe now we have to work off of the state's fiscal year rather than the town's fiscal year, and so far I think they have about $11,000 left to spend for this year. And our vote was 4 in favor, 0 against.
Further discussion, Mr. Kelly.
Question to Mr. Mason through you, Mr. Chairman. I thought I read on this document, I can't locate it now, is that we get our money towards the end of the year, September? We spend it and then they reimburse us. We file some documentation and they give us. I don't know that we get the grant up front.
Correct. We have to, if I'm not mistaken, but I think Mr. Geiger can tell you, I think we have to give them a schedule of the dates we are scheduling to perform those services, which we have. They're part of your blue sheet. And we submit that and it goes into, we have a special fund to keep track of that because we have a reporting we have to do on that. Yes.
So my concern is this. One, certainly the world has changed. Who knows if they'll be paying these grants come September of 2009, number one. Number two, I just believe that if we think that DUI enforcement is something important that we want to do in the town, we should put it in the budget and pay for it. We get into this grant giving back and forth, sending our money up there to Hartford, and they take their 90% cut and send us back a few dollars for a grant, and we think it's wonderful. And maybe it starts here, or it starts somewhere, where we say that we don't want to do this anymore. We're doing our budget, we'll run our budget, and we don't need these grants. So I'm just going to vote no, but I just wanted to have my say. I get tired of this.
Further discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Abstentions? 10-1-0. Next item before us, PB1, Mr. Mason.
PB1 comes from the probate court, one we don't see too often. It's for an additional appropriation for document imaging, and I so move the item.
Moved by Mr. Mason. Second by Mr. Simon. Discussion, Mr. Mason.
Judge Hopper appeared before us last night to discuss this. There's been a change in the last 2 years on the document imaging and the recording of tax information that we get. And what's happened is the department in the first year absorbed it. The second year, they're having to keep more records of this. There was a lot of discussion about, is there another way we can do this to avoid the cost? And obviously, the probate court will look into that. But as it stands right now, for this year, they will have a shortfall of $12,000. They do have the option to hold it and let it go into next year because it's continuing. But our committee voted 4-0 to do the additional appropriation for this time frame right now. And during the budget process, we're going to look to see if there's an alternative method of doing the record storage, or if they are going to need that. There's talk of some equipment that they might be able to get through a state grant, which would allow them to be able to do a little bit more of it in-house.
With us tonight also is Judge Hopper to answer any questions. Our budget director, though, did you have an opportunity to speak with our IT director?
Briefly this afternoon, and he thought he understood this was a state system, and its records were actually at the state level, not in the town, and they also have to be confidential. So there'll be issues with storing it on our network.
So-
But he's gonna look into it.
Okay, so in essence, there just needs to be maybe just a conversation between the probate court, our IT director, to see if there's any efficiencies looking forward to the 9-10 budget. Judge?
We also checked in on this today, and probate administration advised us that they would like to keep all the courts consistent, so they do not want us going through the town system. They want us to get a scanner for uniform purposes as well as confidentiality purposes. The scanner's $6,000, and then there's a $1,355 maintenance support contract. But the really good news is, right now it costs us between 40 and 50 cents per page when we get the books for after everything's microfilmed. When we scan, we won't get the books anymore, but we still have to send the information up to a safe house, and they turn it into, they convert it into film, but it will only be 6 cents per page. So for next year's budget, we were asking for $35,000. We're going to back that down to $20,000, which is what we normally do, to hopefully be able to purchase this equipment, which is $6,000, and to get the contract going, and also finish up what we've already microfilmed. And then after that, I would say that $20,000 will be probably reduced to more like $12,000 a year, and we'll be in good shape. The real question is, we could get the equipment as soon as February. We've told them we don't have the money until July, so they're looking into whether they'll spot us until then. If you all would like to get the money to us, which again would be around $7,000 and change, then we could begin scanning as early as February. So.
Great, thank you for following up on that.
Sure.
Mr. Simon?
Yeah, but even if we approved more money than the 12,000, it still has to go to the RTM, doesn't it?
Yes.
So you wouldn't be able to get this before March at the earliest.
And
And it's probably just easier then to just do it as part of the budget cycle. And is this item in the capital budget?
no, it's not as of yet.
Below the threshold,
Is below the threshold.
10.
But it's going to be part of the budget submission.
We'll have to, now that they've offered it, they actually just offered it to us yesterday. We've been asking for it for as long as I've been judge, 6+ years, and they finally have come to see us fit to have the scanning system and made their way down to Greenwich. So we'll either have it if they are willing to wait to get paid until the new year or the new fiscal year, or we'll wait till July. But we'll amend our proposed budget if that's the correct procedure. Forgive me for not knowing the procedures very well, but we asked for $35,000 for our microfilming. We'll back that down to something else, significantly less.
But then I would include the capital item in your budget, or the equipment in your budget for next year.
Which we will do, and probably be part of that $20,000. We'll just cut it up into $7,000 or $6,000 of it would be the capital, and $1,355 for the service contract, and then we'll figure out, based on past year's experiences, how much we're going to need at 6 cents per page.
I have one more question. So when you scan this information, where does it go?
We scan it, it'll be on a computer, so that if anybody from a certain date, say July 1 of 2009, if that's where we start, wants to see a particular file, they'll come and they can see it on the computer and can print any information out.
And you
Anything-
have all the computers, you have all the software, you have everything you need to
That'll be
run
part of the
this,
6,000. And
including the computer.
that's correct.
So you're getting a system.
It'll be a full system, that's correct. And then anything prior to whenever we start would be manual until someday that we decide to put everything on computers.
Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? 11-0-0. Thank you, Judge.
Thank you.
PS1, Mr. Mason? I'm sorry, PS1 was withdrawn. That will come back before us in February to discuss the multi-space pay stations. SE 16 now comes before us. Mr. Mason.
SC 16 is a request for an additional appropriation from the Office of the First Selectman for a legal case, Welch versus the Town of Greenwich, and I so move the item.
Moved by Mr. Mason, second by Mr. Simon. Discussion, Mr. Mason.
Last evening, the Budget Committee met, and we met with outside counsel for this case, Valerie Mays from our Town Law Department, Maureen Cast. This is a case of an employee in the past who has a claim against the town for termination of employment due to budgetary reasons. We had an extremely lengthy debate on this case. It was an executive session, and it is my knowledge that the Law Committee had been having conversations about this case back some months. There was talk about a potential settlement in the case. After a lengthy discussion, we decided to take a vote on this, and our vote on this matter was 0 in favor, 4 against, and we would recommend not settling this one. And if we need any further discussion on the merits of the case or anything, I think Mr. Fox, who's in attendance, would probably recommend executive session.
Mr. Campbell, do you have anything to add from the Law Committee on this matter?
As Mr. Mason said, the Law Committee did not take a vote on this. The settlement proposal came before us just recently, and the Law Committee did not have a quorum. Ms. Barton has been out of the country for 2 weeks. But we had reviewed it on 2 separate occasions during the last calendar year. Had spent a great deal of time talking about the case. And I was in attendance last night along with, I believe, all but one member of the BET and participated in that session. So I think the Law Committee has had a very good chance to review this.
I'll ask for any discussion, however, understanding that if there is any substantive discussion on this matter, we will first seek to go into executive session. So is there any discussion to be had first in open session, and then if you have any discussion for executive session, I would ask that you note that before you begin to speak so that we can make the appropriate motion. Mr. Simon?
I just want to know if the town attorney wants to add anything to the discussion based upon what he's heard before we vote.
Mr. Simon, I thank you for the opportunity, but no, I think there has been over a period of several months a good give and take with the Law Committee, with Nancy Barton and Jim Campbell. We've debated it back and forth. We have had a good discussion. My counterpart has had a good discussion with you folks last evening in executive session. This is a scenario where what is important to me as town council is that there has been an opportunity for the people that make policy to know where we are, to know what's happening, to consider what they want to do, and then make that decision. So I'm very comfortable with the presentation that has been made, but I thank you again for the opportunity.
Any other discussion? All those in favor of SC 16 indicate by saying aye. All opposed? Aye. Nay.
We say down here.
Abstentions. Vote is 0, 11, 0. That one fails. Thank you, Mr. Fox. Before we begin, because there are so many people in the audience, let me just at least thank those who did appear before us tonight. In tonight's attendance is our town administrator, John Crary. We have Ted Gortney, who will be presenting the assessor's report. We have the full complement of the Board of Selectmen, and also this evening, Leslie Moriarty, Vice Chairman of the Board of Education. With that, why don't we move on to the assessor's report, item 3 on our agenda. Mr. Gortney, Town Assessor. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. You have my report, and I'm prepared to answer any questions that you may have. I would like to report that last night the RTM did pass the required language for the senior program, and the only thing that was changed was putting in a sunset clause, sunsetting in June of 13 2013. So we're in the process now of preparing all the materials we'll be mailing out to all of the seniors that will be required to renew this year. And we expect that because of the changes that there'll be a lot of new people coming into the program in addition. So I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Questions for Mr. Gortney? I know last month there was a question regarding some of the litigation, and you've provided us a much more detailed report as to the remaining cases. So if anybody has any questions on that as well, this is the opportunity to ask questions about that. Mr. Kelly?
I want to thank you for the information. It was very helpful, and it gave us much better insight into what is actually happening in this litigation. There's just two further things, if you could do for me, if Chairman so designates. In the 2005 revaluation, you said there were 13 cases outstanding, and then the last sentence of that report gave information as to pretrial hearings on 4, a trial date on another, and a settlement. So you covered 6 of them. I just don't know what happened with the 5 others. And all I want is just, I don't want another report. I just want a time frame. So with respect to the other 5, you could just say settlement negotiations are ongoing. We hope to conclude within 2 months, 6 months, 9 months, 2 years, if there's something on that. And the other one was on the 2001 revaluation. You told us about the 2 cases, but I don't have any time frame as to what will happen next. If it's just ongoing settlement negotiations, is there a time frame? That's, if you can give it to me to the extent you can.
Really, in answer to both of those questions, the assessor does not have any control over the court matters. It's handled by the law department, and the law department seeks to facilitate things as best it can over time. However, I think that those questions I'd have to raise with the law department because I can't really answer them.
Okay, could we just send a memo to could we ask that? Just to get it, all I want is a time frame.
On the pending litigation?
Yeah, that's all. Are these things going to go on for another 6 years? Are they going to be resolved, or what is the problem, that they can't be resolved in 8 years?
Okay.
That's all. But thank you for the information. I appreciate it.
Other questions for Mr. Gortney or the assessor's report? Is there a motion to accept the assessor's report? Moved by Ms. Tarkington. Second by Mr. Mason. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? 11-0-0.
As requested, I did bring along a demonstration of the new information system that's going to be available for the town, and if I could take just a few minutes to demonstrate it. This is known as the Property Max system, and in essence, it allows the public to make direct access and secure information about their own property or about any other property in town. And I've selected a couple of properties just to make you aware of how it works. The most important thing is getting the computer to work. There it goes. I don't think it's working yet. Okay. So first of all, I chose a large house.
Well, hold on. Are we supposed to be seeing that on the screen behind you?
Okay, let me think. That I think is the.
Well, Mr. Curtis is trying to work through this, and while Ted is still here, I can take this opportunity to briefly discuss our evaluation process of both the comptroller and the assessor. As you may recall, last meeting we discussed having the evaluations stem from both myself and Bill Finger and then distributed. We will do that. Those will be available for comment before the next meeting, and then I will ask for a vote on both of those evaluations then at the next meeting. So you'll get an opportunity between now and the next meeting to comment, and then we'll put them together in final form, and we'll vote on their two evaluations in February.
Well, we can see it with the computer closed. Try opening it, see if it works. All right. Okay, so this is a large house in town. It's owned by Mel Gibson. And you can see that we do have a complete sketch of the drawing and a photograph of the property. And the cards are set up so that they start off with basic information. The property's in his partner's names. You can see the parcel number. Okay. You can see the parcel number, the map number, the address, the basic ownership information, the location, the legal description, the zoning, type property, neighborhood, the current assessments. This property, by the way, consists of several parcels. I'm just showing you the one parcel that has the house on it. And then here's our land influence codes where we make adjustments for differences of land and where we show the rates for the land. And then below that are building characteristics. The dwelling is on one line and then showing the miscellaneous types of improvements, swimming pool, tennis courts, and so forth. And then some basic information about the structure. The finished area is 15,862 square feet. The total area includes the attic and the basement that is not finished. Has 15 bedrooms, 7 full baths, 6 half baths, 2,000 square foot garage. And looking down here beyond the sketch, you can see where each one of these numbered items surrounds the house where it's located. And then you can check the sales information. You can see the property was acquired in July 1st of 1994 for $9.25 million. So that gives you kind of an idea of the of what we have on it. The final thing that's shown is the valuation history, the land improvements, the total value, and the reason for the assessment change. I thought I'd show you one other property and then show you another feature.
Ms. Tarkington, do you have a question?
Has there been any questions raised about people's security with having so much information on the web, and also on the web, the location of all the rooms within their house, their bedrooms, and everything else? I mean, is anyone, or is that the purpose of this meeting, for us to begin to think about these things? I mean, have you sat down with perhaps, say, the police department to see if this is prudent, or is this something that we have to do from a freedom of information standpoint?
I don't think that this is going to be covered by freedom of information.
This is just something we're volunteering to do?
Yes. This now is presently provided in most communities in Fairfield County. In fact, we're one of the last ones to have an information system that's like this made available. So it's not unusual. I've been inviting comments from not only you, the board members, but from the general public as we go along, and I've not received any negative comments yet about it, but I am certainly open to discussion and open to listening to people's concerns. We attempted to eliminate information that we thought would be personal or would be giving too much information, and we got rid of about half of all the information that was available. And we felt like what is left now is pretty much the common information that's generally available. All of this information, of course, and more is available to the public when they come into our office because it is public information. It is part of our database.
But it's not quite as accessible to the world, point number one. And, I mean, the first property you showed, I'm sure has gates and systems and so forth, which would help them. But many of us here don't have, or aren't fortunate enough to have that much security at our homes. So, I mean, I'm surprised that they can just, this much information about our homes can be on the web, particularly locations of bedrooms and other such information. And the other towns aren't raising these issues?
I think that they've been through kind of the same kind of questions you're raising, and they've kind of reached a consensus that it is information that's readily available and that the public generally does want to have access to the information. But again, I'm willing to consider everyone's concern and to try to limit things that we think would be damaging. You can see that typically, for example, we don't show where the bedrooms are. We show there's a front porch there and the basic house and where the garage is, and you can pretty well tell by the picture, where things are located already. I'm showing this house because it's a house that was built recently, and it sold for $3.7 million. It's located in Old Greenwich, and it's kind of typical of a lot of the newer houses that we have that have been built more recently. And the reason for showing this is I thought I'd show you one other feature. You're able to go and look for comparable sales so that if you are protesting the value of your property or if you really want to know what other properties are selling for, there's a mechanism. And I just thought I'd show that and then I'll conclude and be done. But there's a little feature over here on the left that's called sales. Let's see. What the sales feature allows you to do, and for some reason it's not working, is to actually look for all the comparable sales, and you put in information about what range of square foot areas, what range of features that you want, and you can then choose. You can find within your neighborhood all the sales that reach your criteria for being comparable, and that's one of the nice features because it gives the public an immediate feeling about their property value compared to all the other properties. So that basically is all I wanted to show you.
When did you go online with this?
It's not available to the public yet. It's still in a test mode. I've given you the access to it. Has anyone tried to access the files? Larry did. Okay, you have the information in the material that I gave you, and you might like to go online and just get a feel for it. And if you draw some conclusions about some things that you think should not be public, please let me know. And if you have any other thoughts about it, please let me know.
When do you intend to go online with this?
Hopefully within 2 weeks.
Okay, so, but from a timing standpoint, I mean, I know you've given us an opportunity after several discussions prior to actually putting the data there and starting to run this test program as to whether or not certain information should or should not be included. And I know you've received either you have received comments from BET members or you haven't, but that's the result of the prior discussions. And they I think we've had at least twice. I know we've discussed this before this board about what type of information should or should not be there. But now that people are seeing it on screen, there might be either a difference of opinion or an opinion about whether or not that information should be made available. My concern is if you're soliciting that type of response from us, we will not meet as a body for more than 2 weeks when you want to go online with this. Should we not then wait until after our February meeting to go online with that if in fact it's decided that certain information should or should not be included? Because what I don't want to have happen here is that it's not a decision of the BET, which I believe it should be if we're giving you guidance as to what should or shouldn't be on there, and we should be able to talk about that as a group. So do people have an opinion about that as I'm just sort of talking out loud here? Ms. Tarkington, you had your hand up first.
I did have, excuse me, I did have my hand up. Mr. Chairman, could we ask Mr. Gartney through you to perhaps contact either the police chief or through him, the neighborhood resources officers, and perhaps review with them this particular system and this information so that we can perhaps get this feedback from Mr. Gwartney. These neighborhood resources officers meet with our neighborhood associations. There have been a lot of robberies recently, and I've certainly been getting communications on my computer, so I think if we all work together, that might be constructive.
Mr. Raymer.
Mr. Gwartney made the point, but maybe, Leslie, if I were to repeat a point that he made, maybe it'd be clearer for you. If you walked into the assessor's office now, without identifying who you are, what your purpose is, sitting in a row in front of you are a series of white loose-leaf notebooks, which are the field card listed by property address. And when you opened it to any address you'd like, you'd have all the information that you just saw on the screen, with the exception, of course, of the ability for the computer to scan for comparable pricing. If that wasn't satisfactory to you, you could go over to the computers that were on a shelf there, still without identifying yourself, and you could call up by property address or owner or tax identification number that field card. So there's nothing that's being put available online now that isn't already available to the general public without identifying themselves. So I don't think there's anything new here that's compromising. You may have an issue as to whether or not field cards altogether should have less information or something, but what Mr. Gwartney is producing here is simply the convenience of a person being able to do that remotely online from a computer in their own house. It's not some new, fresh compromise of personal information of a property owner in Greenwich.
Mr. Finger.
I was going to echo what Mr. Raymer just said. And in fact, if somebody really wants to find out information, what's not on there, they can find out by going to the building department and going and looking at building plans, where they get much more detailed information. So if somebody really wants to find out about what's going on in somebody's home in terms of rooms and access, that information is already available to the public.
Any other comments? We're not going to have a dialogue or a point counterpoint on this. Mr. Gwartney, before I call on Mr. Campbell, are you wedded to the 2-week?
No.
Okay, so I think this discussion, if anything, it just proves one thing, that irrespective of where one falls with whether or not the information is appropriate to be online or not, or this board wants to take a position on it, the fact remains that we will not be able to do that tonight, although some may have an opinion that what's up there is fine, it's already accessible. But if there's no harm in simply waiting for an affirmative vote or the lack thereof, we should hold off and simply, as a body, take up, if someone wants to make a motion to delete some items or add some items, to take that up in a more formal process and wait until that time to do so. Mr. Campbell.
You had mentioned that you have eliminated about half, I think you said, of the information you might have included. I just wondered if you could generally describe what did you eliminate and what was the criteria you used for deleting that information?
The main criteria is that it would be confusing for the public to understand. It was kind of detailed cost tables going into how structures are costed and built. And it's something that would be beyond the comprehension of most people. So we decided to get rid of any of those kinds of things that were confusing.
But it was, so as Mr. Raymer and Finger were saying, what's on the field card, you're going to see that on the
Yes.
system. Okay.
I might also point out that one of the reasons for doing this is that the real estate industry, in particular appraisers and realtors, spend a lot of time coming to our office. And I think that this will reduce some of that traffic that we get, because they'll be able to get the same information directly in their homes.
So I would suggest that if you do have a concern, after you have a chance to go to the site, look at it, check out, compare it to a field card, if you so desire in the assessor's office, that if there is a motion that I will expect that motions to be made next time, if in fact one wishes to eliminate some portion of the information that's being provided, and we'll simply take it up for a vote during the time that the assessor makes his presentation in February.
And I will make it a point to talk to the police department also to get their view, show them what we're doing so that they're aware of it.
That would be helpful.
Okay.
Any other questions on the report? Thank you for the presentation, and we do hope that there can be an enormous efficiency gained in this field.
Okay, very good.
BET Committee and Special Project Team reports. You should have
Mr. Chair, could I?
Mr. Norton.
Although it indicates that the audit committee report is included in the package that was distributed, it's actually distributed this evening. We met last Thursday, and I was unable to get it completed in time for this package.
Yes, and I think everyone now has a copy. Are there any questions on any of the reports? You should also note that there's no written Hamilton Avenue Building Committee report, and that is based upon the fact that this project remains as fluid as ever. I can tell you, yeah, that's probably more appropriate. I can tell you at this point that one of the two chimney flues have been replaced. However, the other flue would have been replaced at this time. It was fabricated and remains on the property. The problem now is gaining access to the roof because the roof is covered in ice and snow. It is not so easy to simply remove the ice and snow because one does not want to breach the roof membrane or put some solution of salt or some substance like that. My understanding as of this afternoon was that Worth would not remove the ice and snow. And so the chairman of the committee now is contemplating hiring another contractor to simply come in to remove the ice and snow to gain access to the vent by which you put down the flue so that we can get a TCO. The goal still is to obtain a TCO by the 30th so that to give the Board of Ed available as many options as possible for moving into the school. It does appear there are a few other minor issues relative to the TCO, but those are more, seems to be administrative than not. And so it really is the issue of the chimney flue, getting it installed, and then simply requesting that the TCO be provided. Building committee is next Tuesday. We should know more at that point, and hopefully looking towards gaining the TCO by the 30th. My understanding it's supposed to be close to 40-ish one of these days, so hopefully that'll help. Any other questions on the committee reports? Moving on to the comptroller's report then, item 5 on the agenda. Mr. Mynarski, our town comptroller. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, BET members. Very happy to report that we did go to market last Thursday and we refinanced $45 million and borrowed an additional $27 million to come up with the $72 million. And we've got what is believed to be a record or close to a record rate of 0.38. There was 10 bidding firms, and they bid 13. There was 13 bids from 10 different firms. It was very competitive, and it maxed out at almost 1%, from a low of 0.38 to 1%. Other than that, good news. You all have a copy of the Comptroller's report, and I'll answer any questions at this time.
Mr. Norton.
Actually, I'm going to address the ban offering that we did. I had asked Peter, the controller, to give me the bid sheets, and he handed them to me this evening. And actually, I think I count 2, 4, 7. There were 7 bids for the full $72 million, and they ranged, as Peter just indicated, from 38.25 basis points to 96 basis points by Citigroup. I think we had an excellent effort, and I want to personally compliment you for the completion of this.
Thank you.
Mr. Simon.
On page 2, under risk management, could you just explain to me this first sentence? Did we acquire the adequate insurance, or did we ensure that the adequate insurance was acquired?
Say that again.
Did the town acquire?
We have the insurance in place.
Right. Who paid for the insurance?
This would be part of the cost for our Project Renew.
So we, out of the general fund, paid for insurance for Project Renew?
No, it would be capital projects. It would be Project Renew. There was a $7.3 million appropriation. There was a $3.7 million piece, and there was a $3.6 million piece. The $3.7 million piece consisted of the architect, construction manager, or construction manager at risk, as we now call it, and all the ancillary costs. And in there were the various legal and insurance costs.
So we're paying insurance for the architect? And we're paying, I mean, it says a $5 million professional liability policy for design work on the project and met performance, maintenance, and payment bond requirements. So we met our own payment bond requirements through the insurance that we purchased for this project.
This was the risk manager working with the purchasing department and Franklin Company, establishing what the proper levels of insurance were required. There was two separate levels. There was one that was the normal required insurances, and then there was the additional insurance requirements for the construction manager at risk. The additional $5 million for liability and the umbrella policy were the requirements of Franklin Company and the town. So that was the additional requirements that were met. There was actually two pieces to this. This project was a little bit different than the other previous capital projects for, I'm sorry, Leslie was at the meeting we attended. Do you want to add to that?
No, I was going to ask.
Hold on. Mr. Simon, though, I'm not sure your question was answered.
I don't think it was.
Okay, so I just want to make sure everybody understands the question, and so that, different from what's written here, from what you just said, it would appear that it's the architect or some other third party that purchased the insurance.
That's correct. We ensured that the adequate levels were purchased by the third party.
So, in response to Mr. Simon's question, we did not purchase adequate insurance.
Okay, I see now the
Right?
question. It's not written clearly. It's actually written inaccurately. The role of the risk manager with the Franklin Company was to ensure that the third party met the adequate insurance requirement levels. So you are correct. It is miswritten.
Right, that would make more sense. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Ms. Tarky, on this topic or any,
No, I confirm what Mr. Minarski has just said.
Mr. Kelly, questions on the comptroller's report in general or this issue?
I just want to follow up on that for 1 second. Do we verify the actual policies and the additional insured endorsements? Does Frankel do that?
The risk manager does that.
So we don't just, because when I was looking at this 10 years ago, we were relying upon certificates of insurance and not actually looking at the additional insured endorsements. And there are hundreds of those, and some of them are illusory and take away the obligations that you think you're getting on the certificate. So I just wanted to be assured that we are actually looking at those additional insured endorsements and the policy, not just relying upon a certificate. And I think that's important, because I had this discussion with Frankel 10 years ago, or whenever it was, when we went through the policies. So I think it's important, especially with these large construction projects, because some of the carriers will walk away based on the additional insured endorsement.
Yes.
Okay.
Other questions on this item or any other within the comptroller's report? Mr. Norton.
One last item. We've requested the controller each month to provide us with a cash flow statement in his package, and it was not included, but it was distributed earlier this evening, so I believe everybody has in front of them the cash flow statement, and it's accurate through the month of December. It was adjusted as presented to the Investment Advisory Committee that this is accurate. The figures through the month of December are the actual figures, and it's a projection based upon last year for the following 6 months. Is that correct, Peter?
Actually, that was the next item. That was going to be the Treasurer's report, and I was going to report on the cash flow.
Okay.
You want me to talk to it now? Or you
Oh,
want-
no, why don't we, any other questions on the comptroller's report?
I was including it here.
Can I have a motion to accept the comptroller's report? Moved by Mr. Norton,
Second?
second by Mrs. Tarkington. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? 11-0-0. Thank you. Treasurer's report.
Actually, the Art Norton presented part of the presentation. What I was going to say was, at the request of the BET, the cash forecast is going to be attached to the Treasurer's report. The cash forecast was on the agenda for January 12th, last Monday, before the BET Investment Committee with Art and Bill Finger. And at the suggestion of Bill Campbell at a previous meeting, we expanded the report, we brought it to the committee, and it was reviewed extensively, and there was a number of suggested changes. And because of the changes, that's what delayed the report, and we didn't get it in time into the package to be included with the Treasurer's report. Other than that, Art has already mentioned that it's accurate through 6 months as far as the revenues and everything below in the expenditure lines.
Any other questions, comments relative to the Treasurer's report?
And on this item, Mr. Chair, that the 6 months, January through the end of the year, are projections based upon last fiscal year, correct?
Basically, it's historical within any changes that we're aware of. Obviously, the historical side, the revenue side, we're not relying upon. And it's a lot more difficult to extrapolate because of the sharp decline in revenues for especially the large three, the building permits, the conveyance tax, and the interest income. But historically, we're relying on the expenditure side to be the same with the increase through the budget.
Other questions, comments? Is there a motion to approve the Treasurer's report? Moved by Mr. Norton.
Second.
Second by Mr. Mason. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? 11-0-0. Item 7 now comes before us. Approval of the BET regular meeting minutes for December 15th, 2008.
Mr. Chairman, I would just like to comment that there were a couple of minor, really formatting changes at the beginning of the minutes that
Okay.
were recommended that will be done.
Okay. So can I have a motion to approve as amended for formatting changes as provided? Sir, motion by Mr. Finger. Does no one like minutes this month? Second by Mr. Campbell. Thank you. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? 11-0-0. Officers report, Mr. Stone?
No, thank you.
Ms. Tarkington?
Yes, I'd just like to request, if people would please come to a microphone during the meeting when they speak. We have had several instances where we sort of had some bare spots in our tapes or even on the Channel 79 recordings. And it's just helpful to all if a microphone is available when people speak. Thanks.
For the chairman's remarks, I've already gone over the evaluations. We'll do those in February. It's a good segue from Ms. Tarkington's comments relative to sound. One of the things that we're trying to do is work on having some sort of better sound system for the cone room during the budget deliberations. As you all know, the Finance Department has been working earnestly with the First Selectman's Office to produce the consolidated budget. Their focus then shifts to the BET Budget Committee, and most of our heavy lifting occurs during the month of February. We are trying to secure a better sound system for the cone room so that people who do attend, especially BET members, can participate and at least hear the conversation that's taking place. One of the criticisms over the past few years has been that you can't hear discussions, and therefore it's very difficult to stay attuned to what's happening. I do know that long term, my understanding is the town would like ultimately with or in partnership with Channel 79 to try to wire the room for permanent sound. But at this point in time, I'm just trying to get us a system that can remain in place at least for the month or on a semi-permanent basis so that we can have a better discussion. Mr. Mynarski.
Just as a follow-up, Roland and I met with Stuart Ryder, I believe I got his last name correct, who's procuring a grant. And I believe it's going to be tomorrow or Friday. It's finalized, and I apologize for forgetting the amount. He's going to come to the BET in February because it wasn't accepted by the state. And the proceeds from the grant, it's going to be BET in February and RTM in March, is going to be used exclusively to wire up the cone room.
Great.
Which is exactly what you're talking about.
Right, but my concern still is then this year that won't affect it, and so we still need to try to make a temporary solution. Mr. Crumbine.
The state has preliminarily approved it, and the amount is about $22,000, and it's specifically to wire the cone room.
Great. My understanding is that Channel 79 then would use that to televise some of those meetings, which would just be great, as we all know that room is used heavily, and I think the public would be at an advantage to have access to some of those discussions. Okay, if you have any other suggestions before we actually start the budget process, before you know it, the first selectman will be before us making his presentation on the consolidated budget. I'm sure he'll be happy to pass it along to us. We'll wait to the 26th. And then it's incumbent on all of us to work with the Budget Committee in coming up with solutions where they're needed.
Steve, may I just make one comment publicly that, not on the substance of the budget, but I do think it's good evening. I do want to say publicly that the amount of time and effort that Roland Geiger has put into this year's budget has been absolutely tremendous. The amount of analysis and due diligence and responsiveness that this man provides, not just to me, but I'm sure the people before me, to all of you, is certainly commendable, and I want to say publicly how much I appreciate and value him. And without him, I would say we're all up the creek. But Roland, be well. We need you, and thank you for all you've done.
I would also note that Roland might have a little extra kick to his step. He's a diehard Steelers fan, and so.
Oh, no wonder why he's smiling.
That explains the terrible towel.
Okay. That finishes off item 8 of our agenda, officers' report. Moving on to 9, old business. The first item on that is the other post-employment benefits investment guideline resolutions. I think that's one of our best titles ever for an item. With that, I will turn it over to Mr. Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's certainly our longest title. I'll move this, and then I'll have some comments following a second, which I hope will be forthcoming. So I move the resolution for OPEB Trust Board investment guidelines.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Stone, second by Mr. Simon. Discussion, Mr. Stone.
Okay, what you have before you is essentially the resolution presented for a first reading at our December meeting. If you'll recall, we requested comments from other board members. There were none at that time, but we did have a trust board meeting on the 12th of January, and we'd invited to participate in that Mr. Norton and Mr. Finger, comprising the investment committee. And together we made some what I'll call modest word changes, which essentially clarify the original resolution. You'll have that before you tonight. There was no substantive change, so I'm certainly expecting to respond to any further questions that there might still be on the proposal. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Stone, and for your committee's work on the 12th. Any questions or discussion on this resolution? Mr. Simon?
There's still one typo. In the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th line down in the last paragraph, it should say the transfer between asset classes.
As opposed to class.
Yes.
You can't transfer it.
Thank you.
Any objection to that change?
That was really the change. It was on the second page, but just didn't get corrected on the
original.
right.
Hearing none, I'll accept that change as unanimous consent. So now it's been moved by Mr. Stone, second by Mr. Simon, regarding the resolution that's before you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? 11-0-0. Mr. Stone, is there anything else from your committee? Isn't there another resolution?
The nature of the resolution that we also approved at the committee meeting is basically included, and that was essentially to rebalance to the extent of some monies to be moved to the fixed income portfolio managed by the Bank of America. That's already incorporated in the investment guidelines, so I don't believe there has to be full board action on that.
Could I comment?
Mr. Simon, sorry.
I thought we were the board, which is the last sentence of the OPEB trust report, voted to transfer $250,000 in January, or are we going to wait until, I thought we voted, the second resolution was to do the transfer in January,
Well,
not in February, because this,
by having approved this resolution, which we've just done now, the treasurer has the capability of doing the rebalancing that essentially was, she was empowered to do anyway. What this has done is essentially modified that power, and what we did essentially was simply validate what it is that we wanted to have done. She has those instructions. I don't believe there needs to be additional board action on what she was previously empowered to do, and now essentially she's also empowered to do within the nature of what it is that we'd approved.
I think the previous board action enabled her to, or asked her to rebalance up to $500,000.
Up to, and this most recent action that we took at the meeting on the 12th reduced that, as does this new resolution, the guidelines, which have basically reduced that particular level, maximum rebalancing from 500,000 to 250.
Which is the first sentence.
I'm sorry?
Which is the first sentence of the fourth paragraph.
Yeah, I think Mr. Stone is right in terms of taking that into consideration in the full body of the resolution.
In other words, it would be a further, let's call it a redundancy, to have yet another resolution before this board.
But we as a trust board did pass two resolutions.
Which I believe was reported in the report, but there need not, once again, I'll be redundant all over again. Since the principal resolution, the one with the lengthy title, which we've just voted on, validates what it is that the second resolution was authorizing the treasurer to do, there need not be a second resolution before this board.
Okay, so this basically says in the month of January, she would rebalance to 250. and then starting with the last business day of January, April, July, and October, she would use the formula that we set up.
For everyone's sort of knowledge, the OPEB trust obviously is a new creature to even the BET. And in fact, at the meeting on the 12th, there was a discussion about lines of authority. It's an advisory board to the BET. And so a discussion was had, I'll bet a brief discussion regarding that. And so one of the issues that has arisen is we need to make sure those lines of communication are clear, and roles and responsibilities, especially because it is a brand new board. And we want to make sure we do it right starting out. And so Mr. Stone and I have had conversations about that and intend to continue that dialogue to try to figure this out, bring it back before the BET, and make changes if we have to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me go back a little bit on this point. I think I know what Mr. Simon is driving at, although it wasn't stated as clearly as originally. I believe he's focusing on the rebalancing dates. And in fact, this resolution does reference a rebalancing date of the end of January and other quarterly dates thereafter. But I'll hasten to remind him and explain to the board that the OPEB Trust Board had instructed the treasurer last month or possibly 2 months ago to cease the rebalancing activities until there had been further board action. So basically, if you will, there is a pent-up amount still to be rebalanced, which she can operate under, and I believe she's intending to operate under, without waiting until the end of the month of January.
We'll endeavor to sort of make sure we clean this up, roles and responsibilities are clearly delineated, and if need be, bring it back to the BET in the coming months. Obviously, with the budget coming before us, it might take a back seat for a period of time, but we'll get to it and bring it back before this body. Thank you, Mr. Stone, and your committee's work. The last item on old business is just simply to, again, provide you with a copy of the January and February, well, in fact, the entire year's meeting schedules. Obviously, we do a lot of meetings in February, and we we try to get as much participation at the budget meetings as possible. Certainly, our next big event is, not that the HR committee isn't a big event, but the first selectman's presentation of his budget, followed by the Board of Education's presentation, and the public hearing is scheduled for next Monday. This is, I think, the third year that we've had it in that format where there's presentation, followed by public hearing. And so thereafter, then the budget review starts in earnest.
Is that meeting here?
It's in the town hall meeting room. It's to the full BET.
Which one?
The
Public hearing?
public hearing and the presentation of the budget. To the budget committee?
Monday
Okay.
night is budget committee.
Right, okay.
What is it to?
The budget committee.
So they're gonna be sitting up here. Can we have the nice seats that night? Why don't we just sit up here? We'll keep our mouth shut. I mean,
We
instead
get-
of sitting up there, then they're actually talking to us.
I can talk with Mr. Mason about that.
All right, will you please? Maybe. So, we'll be quiet.
Not even maybe, I will have the conversation with him.
We'd be quiet. We just sit up there.
Different rules for different members maybe, depending on your strength and weakness.
Well, the important thing is that only the budget committee members will have their name tags.
Not a problem. Not a problem. I could work with that. We could talk.
And we should get some food.
Okay.
Only for the budget committee?
And coffee. Yeah, just for the budget committee.
If you have corrections, please give them to me.
The 17th of March is a Tuesday, the 19th of March is a Thursday.
The 17th of March is a Tuesday, And the 19th is a Wednesday.
Thursday.
No, Thursday.
Sorry.
It's only one correction.
2.
17th is shown as.
Okay.
16th.
Anything else that,
16th.
that needs to be brought before us before next Monday evening? Is there a motion to adjourn? Moved and seconded. Thank you.